Hello, my name is Melissa Deehring, and I'm a clinical assistant professor at Qatar University College of Law in Doha, Qatar. Today I'm going to be talking about an exercise I did with my students last semester. It was a debate about acid attacks. For a basic overview, we used Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, which is our tool for online learning. And we've recorded it just like I'm doing for you today. It was in my advocacy skills class, which is an elective for LLB undergrads in the law program. And I did this with my female section. We took 60 minutes to do this activity, and to make sure that everyone participated, I gave it the weight of a quiz, which was about 10% of their grade. And the most significant rule was that every student must participate. They must speak, they must argue, otherwise they would automatically fail. To prepare for this, the students did this outside of class, and I made them watch the Saving Face documentary. This is an Oscar-winning Pakistani documentary about acid attacks in Pakistan. I'm showing you the IMDb so you can have the reference, but actually it's available for free on Dailymotion. You just have to get used to seeing some advertisements. So I gave my students the link. This is what it looks like on Dailymotion. And I told them to ignore all the advertisements, but to please watch the 40-minute video. The whole point, we did multiple debates in this class for advocacy skills. And I had them this is the first debate. I wanted them to advocate a position, their own personal thoughts. I thought advocating something that they believe in strongly would be the first way to get them to debate. And then later in the semester, I had them do debates where they had to take a stance that they didn't necessarily believe personally. They didn't believe in personally, but they had to learn how to argue on behalf of others. But for this one, this was their own personal stance. What did they believe after watching the video? And then I asked them in preparation for this to do any research they wanted about acid attacks. I had different motivations for this one. The first one is I wanted them to learn to advocate, and I wanted them to learn how to advocate and argue their own opinions and beliefs. And how to back those arguments and those beliefs up with facts, with statistics, with examples. And this, I think, is a critical skill, particularly where I live in the Middle East, where a lot of my female students don't necessarily believe that they should be arguing or even giving their opinion in public. And they definitely don't believe that they should be arguing in public with others. So a huge part of my job as professor is not just to teach them the theory and teach them theoretical, but I'm supposed to be giving them life skills. And I want them, if they can't learn how to argue out loud, then I'm not serving them very well. Another thing is I use this as an introduction to what I believe in very strongly is the women, peace, and security agenda. And I need them to learn how to be leaders. I need my students to learn that they can be leaders, that women should, and I want them to learn about different crimes of violence, gender-based violence, and so I wanted to introduce that. The third motivation I had for this, for getting them to watch the video and then do this debate, is I want them to understand the importance of lawyers being community leaders, being activists, participating in pro bono activities. And I want them to understand the huge responsibility it is of joining this legal profession. We have people's lives, futures, freedoms on the line, and I need them to understand the weight of their decision to go into law. I also, for any of my students who might become future family law attorneys or prosecutors or defense attorneys, I wanted to introduce them just to some complicated reasons that victims sometimes stay with perpetrators, because it is complicated. I'm a former juvenile dependency, which is child abuse attorney myself. I was defense counsel. And I want them to understand that it's not just so easy, and that when you're involved in this kind of law, you need to understand the psychology and what's going on in your clients' lives. These are not easy issues to solve. So I wanted to introduce them to those concepts and get them to think about that. And then also, again, I said I love women, peace, and security, and women, peace, and security is actually part of international relations and international security. So I'm trying to get also I'm trying to introduce my students to see that somehow local laws and local issues, which are normally viewed as social justice, that actually they can factor into international relations. And I want them also to kind of start to think about the responsibility of all of us who are lucky enough to come from wealthy and educated societies. Do we have a greater responsibility? Is there more that we can do to try and help others who are not able to have education and the opportunities that we are? And I also want them to consider, going into international relationship or leadership fields. And I want my students to understand that they have valid opinions, that once they research them and once they have well articulated arguments, that those opinions and those arguments can and should be out there for consideration and adoption. So I want them to realize that they can lead, and no one likes being told what they can and cannot do. So through this debate, I'm trying to get them to discover that they can do this, that this is not just something for other people. So those are kind of the motivations here. I've been letting you read my rubric of what I had, how I did it. In the end, my students really surpassed any hopes that I had for this exercise. They researched India, and when India had decided to bring in what were circumstances that made this death penalty versus life. They brought in Iran when they were arguing about whether this should be qisas, which is eye for an eye, and how doctors were really struggling, and how doctors were saying no, they could absolutely not perform qisas or perform that as a kind of punishment because it was against their own obligations, their own duties as doctors. They brought in UN arguments. They argued about torture and whether qisas, was itself a form of torture, and how that they could reconcile that. They argued for life in prison, some of this. So they were arguing, is this really unfairly allowing the perpetrators a chance for redemption? Is that unfair when the women themselves are horribly disfigured for life? They argued for dia. Dia is a type of a forgiveness, a monetary payment. It can be blood money in Qatar for accidental death, whether dia and forgiveness and money is enough. So we argued again. Also, I guess you'll have to see this in Qatar. We really have to argue for Islamic punishments. There's you can't just have this secular argument about acid attacks too. So then we also were talking about whether you can have secular punishments, whether secular punishments or secular laws about preventing these types of crimes are enough, or when religion and religious punishments should be brought in. Basically, the whole thing was just to get the students to argue. And by getting them to stand by themselves, they had to argue. They were given this rubric in advance. They knew everything that was expected to them. And then I should say too that because my students are not really used to, and this is the beginning of class, this was maybe week 3 or week 4, they're not used to expressing their opinion like this. It was a very polite argument. Nobody interrupted each other. Really, I didn't have to. Where I was afraid as an instructor is that people might start attacking each other. That didn't happen at all. Instead, where I found myself really needing is I almost needed to get them to say why. They were very good at expressing their opinion, but not necessarily backing it up with facts and evidence. So getting them to me to pop in to say why, explain this, tell me more, why, why was basically my biggest role. And then making sure that every student, sometimes I needed to prompt them. They would give an argument about maybe prompt 1, but I needed to say, okay, and you haven't told me about, what about this? So I hope you like this exercise. It would be fun if you do it yourself or something different. Thank you so much. Bye.